At the stroke of midnight, a new day brought in a new controversial law in the district. The possession of less than 1 ounce of marijuana is no longer a crime.
It's probably about time. Seems like we could use our resources in other places.
Many of the people we spoke to today were either indifferent about the change or excited.
If alcohol is legal, why shouldn't marijuana be legal? It's less harmful.
The Marijuana Possession Decriminalization Act means people caught with the drug won't be arrested or face jail time, just a fine that's less than a parking ticket.
Some would call it yet another example of the degradation of American society. Others would say it's no worse than stopping at the corner bar for a couple of pops with friends. And there's a third segment of the population that would look at what's happening in Washington, D.C. and quip, I always thought those people were on something in the first place, so what's the big deal? It is no longer a crime in the nation's capital to possess a specific amount of marijuana. What it means for the rest of the nation is another issue buried deep in the weed. Welcome to MidPoint. Criminal defense attorney, noted legal analyst, and a quarter-century of working trials in courtrooms, Adam Thompson joins us on MidPoint. Adam, thanks for being here.
Always a pleasure, Ed. Thanks for having me on.
Adam, what exactly is decriminalization and why is this a big deal in Washington?
Well, they're going to be treating simple possession of marijuana cases basically as a civil offense, not a criminal offense. But it doesn't mean that marijuana is now legal in D.C. All it means that is if you possess 1 ounce or less, all right? We're only talking about cases involving 1 ounce or less. It'll be treated more as a civil non-criminal offense. You'll just be given a ticket as if you jaywalked or you were littering on the street, and the fine is going to be limited to $25. But if you get caught with 1 ounce or more, or they see you smoking in the street, or you sell or trade it, or anything else like that, that's still a crime. You could still be arrested. You could still face the old penalties, which include jail time and up to $1,000 fine.
But what the street officers are saying is now they apparently cannot stop if they smell marijuana. There has to be something a little more than that. And the cops are the ones right now who are complaining because they're the ones saying this takes a lot of their power out of their hands. So do they have it right? And is this going to create a sea of change and problems now for law enforcement?
But from a practical standpoint, I'll tell you it's a mess. All right, this statute's rolling out, and police really haven't been properly trained on it. Could you imagine on one day they go out there, they see someone smoking marijuana, or they have the smell of marijuana in the air. They could use that as some reasonable, articulable fact to approach the suspect. They grab them, they apprehend them, they recover the marijuana, they send it into the lab, it gets tested. That's how a case goes forward. Well, now the next day, they could smell the marijuana, but just smelling it now isn't a reasonable, articulable fact to approach someone and arrest them for marijuana. It's a whole different set of circumstances, and the cops on the beat hitting the boots to the ground, they're not trained in this. So we're going to see a lot of mistakes being made, a lot of situations that violate this new law, and that leads to lawsuits because people are going to say, the law says this and you did that, now I'm suing. You violated my rights.
So how do we then get to a point where we have a law that is passed in a state, a district, the District of Columbia in this case, and the cops aren't ready for it?
Well, the simple solution is this is being put to a vote this November, from what I understand, going on the ballot to make marijuana legalized completely. If it's completely legal, then the government can control it, they can tax it, they could regulate it, they could bring in money you need for education and to hire more cops. And you can put police on the job to deal with more serious crimes, violent crimes and things like that. Do we really need cops out there patrolling for simple marijuana possession cases? I don't think so. I think it's a waste of time and resources as a criminal defense attorney for 25 years. So, you know, there's better ways of doing it. If you legalize it, you don't worry about that anymore. It's not something the cops have to walk on their beat and worry about.
But the cops are going to fire back, and they're going to say that marijuana leads to other things. Those people who are involved in marijuana are involved in other illegal activities here. We have to have the ability to at least open a door that will allow us to look at what potentially may be happening down the road or in conjunction with the marijuana possession.
Well, that's true. Sometimes these stops lead to more, but that's a whole nother ball of, worms we're going to be arguing about, because we get into then the stop and frisk principles, and can police officers stop under what conditions and under what knowledge or what pretext and what facts they know. You know, the basis behind this law coming about, Ed, is because there was such a differentiation between Caucasian suspects and African-American suspects that were arrested. African Americans were arrested at a rate of 8 times that of whites, although the usage was the same. So there was a big racial uproar behind getting this passed, saying we got to stop racial profiling or the discriminatory practices of stopping minorities. And that's the real basis of this law getting changed.
Adam, you just hit on something that a lot of people will argue about. And again, I know there's a ton of numbers out there, but let's talk about what the public perception is. There is a perception out there, and there has been for many years, that there's more marijuana use in the African American communities, that there is more drug dealing in those communities, and that's why some police officials will say that we have to look into those communities specifically. Again, I'm pointing out that there's a lot of numbers that say that simply isn't true, but you will continue to get that pushback from a lot of law enforcement officials, correct?
Well, that is correct, Ed, but it's not correct. What you say is true, but that understanding of a stereotype and
yes,
pushing that stereotype forward has to just end. There have been many studies that have been done in this area, and it shows that the use of marijuana is the same between African Americans and Caucasians. It's basically split down the middle, almost 50-50. But when you have a certain group of classification of people being arrested at 8 times the rate, it raises eyebrows, which leads to another issue we didn't even discuss yet, Ed, is if that's the case and African Americans are being arrested at that higher ratio and there is some discriminatory practice behind it, does really changing this law and decriminalizing it really change the overall culture of what's going to happen in the future? Because if police officers want to get to those same members of that community, they'll make up a new reason to get to that member of the community to do a stop, a frisk, and a search. So will things really change? Who knows? You could hope it will, but more likely than not, it probably won't.
All right, now let me let you hear this sound, and then I'm going to make a comment on this on the other side. Here's Delroy Burton. He's the Washington, D.C. Police Union Chief, claiming that the law will be completely ineffective. Listen to this.
Either our members will make significant mistakes based on the changes in the law from their past practice and what they've known for years and years, or it will do absolutely nothing because they're not clear about what they should be doing.
Now, I'm going to follow this with a law enforcement friend of mine who every time we have this discussion says the exact same thing to me. He says the reason the cops are going to complain is because you're taking away an easy bust.
That's
yes?
True. Listen, there's more marijuana busts than any other type of bust that there is. It gets their numbers up, and it shows that they're, affecting arrests followed by convictions. But are those really the kind of arrests and convictions that we want? Is that really where we want our trained police staff to be focusing on, or somewhere that is more productive to protect society? I'd rather have them chasing violent sexual offenders, chasing violent robbers or burglars and things like that than someone just smoking weed on the corner who's probably not doing anything else.
All right, Adam, now here comes the case that America's talking about on the one issue here. We continue to see drugs or marijuana now being sold in states. We see it being sold over the counter. It's become a retail effect. The states are now picking up potentially billions of dollars in tax dollars from this now. Are we getting to a point right now where if you want to fight the legalization of marijuana, you have to basically decide that it's going to be a losing battle? Sooner or later, this country is going to legalize marijuana.
Great question, and hit the nail on the head. Marijuana in time will be legalized throughout the United States. When you look at the overall numbers and what comes from legalizing it, it just makes sense. All this time and money spent on prosecuting these people, putting them in jail. Once they're out of jail, now they have a stigma of a criminal conviction on their record. It prevents them from getting jobs. They can't get jobs. Then they end up on welfare, and we end up supporting these people all over what? Smoking pot and minor criminal offenses like this. Better to legalize it. There could be standards and controls, and the tax money can be raised and used in other areas. And where it's been done already, it's been very, very, very successful.
Well, they are finding a lot of marijuana left in the rental cars at the Denver airport. I needed to point that out as well as they're cleaning out the cars, which is interesting. With about a minute left here, though, is the bigger thing here that we're going to see a money saving in law enforcement, or the bigger thing that governments are going to perk their ears up and go, wait a minute, look at all those tax dollars that we can now have rolling in that we never had before?
It's a split down the middle of both. When you can utilize your police force in a more effective way, that's a huge check and a huge plus. When you can bring in tax dollars, the more revenue you can bring in as the government to use in other areas and offset your budget problems, the better. It's a win-win on both sides, and a big win for people. And Our privacy rights go up. If police officers can't come up to you now and stop you and question you over situations like this, we got a little more protection, and our Bill of Rights is a little more enforced now.
About 25 seconds left. Would you think that eventually even law enforcement will be happy that they don't have to deal with marijuana, small marijuana busts again?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, come on. Do they really want to just keep chasing down people doing this? And a lot of the time it's teenagers or young kids. You know, I don't think they really want to put a strike on someone's record that young and impact their future for the rest of their lives over something like this. I would hope our law enforcement officials could see better.
Well, like I said, people have always thought that you got to be high to be in Washington, D.C. and be a politician. I guess they're finally finding out that it's true, one way or another. Adam, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show, my friend. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thanks, Ed.
All right. Hey, figure it that way. If you've said it, it's now true. Now you've got the excuse, right? Whew. Next up, a groundbreaking legal case involving a woman, her baby, and drug use. We'll talk about that and a whole lot more when MidPoint continues.